Today it is my great pleasure today's Friday, March the 26th, 2021. It's been already over a year since we are online having those discussions, conversations, and prayers. And we're hoping that, well, the online practice will stay, but hoping that we'll be able to see each other more in person fairly soon. It is my great honor and pleasure to introduce Father Roman Bozyk, Dean of Theology at St. Andrews College, University of Manitoba. Really a good friend of mine, a person, or Father Roman and Dobrodyka Genya were a parish priest in Dobrodyka in our parish for the longest time in the history of this parish.
Until you came.
Until I came here.
Yeah, that's right.
And Father Roman and Dobrodyka Genya were good mentors to my wife and I will internally be grateful for them for their support and kindness. As always, we are asking for your comments to let us know which language you prefer us to speak. So tonight we'll start with prayer, and Father Roman will be talking about Lenten practices according to the Bible, or based on the Bible for that matter, and as well as we'll be able to answer some of the questions that you might have. So please do not hesitate to ask questions, and please let us know which language you would like us to use. Дорогі браття і сестри в Христі, сьогодні з нами є отець доктор Роман Божик, декан факультету богослов'я, колега і святого Андрея. Він разом з Добродійкою Євгенією в нашій парафії Отаві служив понад 11 років. І для мене особисто, і для моєї дружини, вони є, отець Роман і Добродійка були гарними менторами, які багато в чому нам допомогли і наставили. Так що для мене дуже великою честю є те, що сьогодні є з нами отець Роман. Отець Роман буде розмовляти сьогодні якраз про пісні, про практики посту у нашій церкві, особливо коли стосується пощення, утримання від їжі і так далі. Отець Роман є професором богослов'я, і його спеціалізацією є якраз Святе Письмо. І якраз він буде говорити це з точки зору, чи з перспективи також Святого Письма. Але почнемо нашу зустріч сьогодні разом молитвою. Ім'я Отця і Сина Святого Духа. Амінь. Ім'я Отця і Сина Святого Духа. Амінь. Ім'я Отця і Сина Святого Духа. Амінь. Царю Небесний, утішителю душі істини, що всюди єси і все наповняєш, скарби, добра і життя подателю, прийди і вселися в нас, і очисти нас від всякої скверни, і спаси благі душі наші. Слава Отцю і Сину Святому Духу, нині повсякчас, на віки вічні. Амінь. Господи помилуй, Господи помилуй, Господи помилуй. Всечесний Отче, благослови.
З нами Бог і з благодаттю сохрани і спаси нас усіх на цій сесії і так в нашому житті. Амінь.
Ім'я Отця і Сина Святого Духа. Амінь. Ім'я Отця і Сина Святого Духа. Амінь. Ім'я Отця і Сина Святого Духа. Амінь. Отже, вітаю вас.
Дякую.
А до всіх глядачів, що дивляться, будь ласка, дайте нам знати, якою мовою бажаєте, щоб ми розмовляли. І ми розпочнемо, якраз запрошую отця Романа, розпочати це, якщо можна, українською мовою. І ми будемо змінювати з однієї мови на іншу. Please let us know which language you would like us to use, so we can accommodate those who are listening to us. We'll start with Ukrainian, but if more need to be done in English, we're more than happy to say it in English as well. Отже, прошу вас.
Добре, так що ви мене чуєте, так, бо я оце Ігоря тільки тихенько чую, але як ви мене чуєте, то добре. Мені дуже приємно мати нагоду з вами так трошки поділити деякі думки щодо посту. Маю багато дуже гарних спомин із своїх днів в Отаві. І так ще дуже добре якраз знову мати нагоду з вами трошки поділитися з деякими думками. Так що буду почати так із Святого Письма. і говорити тоді якраз про піст.
Отже, Романе,
прошу.
Just one second. Pauline just wrote that she would prefer that there was preference to be done in English. So
Okay.
If we can start with English and then interject more in Ukrainian,
Sure.
would be great.
Okay.
Thank you.
Good. Yes. When I used to live in Ottawa, I noticed sometimes I'd come home to Manitoba, and I would notice there is a slight difference in the way some things are pronounced between Winnipeg and Ottawa. But hopefully you'll understand me in English. That shouldn't be a problem. The fasting in the Old Testament, fasting in the New Testament starts from the underlying position, or what you could call the default position, since we're online, that it is total abstinence. And so when they talked about Lent and fasting, they talked about consecrating a fast for a long period, a short period, or whatever, and it was a total fast. And so we'll look at some of the things between the Old and New Testament, and then we'll move into sort of church practice. One of the things is that one of the things to remember in the Old Testament, fasting is seen as a expression of hardship, an expression of sometimes anger, but also a question of mourning and difficulty. And so when there's great difficulty, when there's a death in the family, there would be fasting. When there is a war, there would be fasting. When there is natural disasters, there would be fasting. Because fasting takes you away from the day-to-day worries and points you towards God. And sometimes I think it's even psychological. This kind of a psychological thing is that even when people were starving because the enemy had come and burnt down your grain fields, or stole all your cattle, there was serious hardship. Sometimes the religious leaders in the Old Testament would sanctify a fast, meaning make a fast, just arbitrarily decide that this will now be 2 weeks of fasting. This is kind of interesting. If you have nothing to eat, it's almost like a way of rescuing you from this, because instead of sitting at home by yourself and worrying that you don't have enough to eat and that you're starving to death, a fast would be proclaimed, and now you're not abstaining from food because you don't have food. You're abstaining from food because you want to point towards God, and it unites the community standing before God. Of course, this cannot last a long time if it is a total abstinence of food. But when we get to the Old Testament and in the New Testament, you have this number of 40, which is always a number of a serious effort. A 1 hour fast is not such a big deal, but a 40-day fast seriously is. And I mean, I'm not a medical doctor or a nutritionist, but sometimes when you read in literature, some scientists are saying that if you have water to drink, you can fast 40 days if you're a healthy person without endangering your life, which is interesting because 40 is the day that's always used as a symbol of how long a Lent should last in the scriptures. So I don't think that's a coincidence. But because the other thing we remember, or in the church life, maybe I might be jumping around a little bit, but in the church, fasting is important, but it depends why we're doing it. And people who are fasting, like some of the heresies, like Gnosticism, they're fasting because they think everything physical is evil, which is a dangerous place to go, because that means everything physical we have around us, plus our own bodies, plus our own spouses and our children. You should abstain from everything so you don't have children, because making more children creates more evil in the world. That's a heresy. But those types of people would try to fast if they found the right, the Gnostics, if they found the right knowledge that they thought would go to heaven, they would sometimes starve themselves to death, which is not only stupid, it's not orthodox. So the Orthodox and even older, Catholics from the early times, the idea was that we had to be able to justify a fast that still was not, we weren't fasting because we were hating the world and hating food and hating the physical world. Because all through the canon law of the church and even in some of the scriptures, you will see it intro that or information that you could be a monk, but you can't say marriage is evil because marriage is a good thing that God blesses. You can fast if you feel like you want to, or you feel you want to self-discipline yourself. But while you're fasting, you cannot say, I'm doing this because food is evil and because you're evil, you're going to hell. You can't say that. So it is a type of not self-punishment or mourning or whatever. It is a type of self-discipline. So we'll get into some of that a little bit later on. I believe I have 4 hours, right, Father Igor, to speak?
Oh, no, 6, Ocha, 6.
6 hours. Okay, very good. I'll do the first 3.5 in English and the rest in Ukrainian. So, when we in the Old Testament, we have one that we read in the church from the prophet Joel in chapter 2, 12 to 15, talking about fasting, weeping, and mourning together. So there is a famine that's or because of a plague of locusts. The locusts have come through and eaten all the grain. There's nothing to eat, and so we are mourning. People are dying. We are weeping, and we are called to fast. And that way, to try to concentrate ourselves on God and to then overcome the difficulties that we have. Fasting does, of course, make it easier to distribute whatever their food is to exactly the people who need it because of the famine conditions that are happening. Prophet Zechariah talks about joy. There will be fasting should be a time of joy, even in the Old Testament, because it should bring us to realize that we really do need God to survive. And this is a general thing you'll see in spiritual literature of Desert Fathers and various teachings in the church, where people who are living in luxury, people who have nothing to worry about, people who have lots of money sometimes start to believe that they don't need God. Uh, in Ukrainian, there's a saying that is the opposite of that. Yak trivoha od Boha. That of course makes much more sense. When things go badly, we go to God. That's good. But the opposite side is not always that good. Is when things go well, we forget about God. That's not so good. But so fasting is seen sometimes as a way of, even in good times, to make us realize that we really can't live more than 3 or 4 days without some kind of, without some kind of major effort if we don't have the gifts that God has given us, water and food. So when we look at the New Testament, we start to there starts to be a little bit of a change, and I'm going to read actually Matthew 6:16 just to remind you of this. In Matthew's Gospel, there is a period where they talk about sort of 3 pillars of the spiritual life. One is, of course, praying, and we've often heard about this, the publican and the Pharisee. We are supposed to pray for God's will, as the prayer basically started today. We have to pray also in secret sometimes. Give God our requests in secret, because as the Pharisees often did, they would pray in public and try to, and there are people like that. We're not going to mention any names, but there are people who want to make sure that everybody knows that they pray a lot and that God really loves them because they listen to prayer and they never stop talking about all the praying they do. That's not usually in the Ottawa parish, I don't think, but must be someplace else. But still, that's one. The other one,
We are
of
very
course,
holy
is,
here.
pardon me?
We are very saintly and holy in here.
Absolutely, yes. And then, of course, there is almsgiving. Again, we hear about this from Christ, giving donations and donating at the temple in the Old Testament in times of Christ, and donating to the church or whatever. There are people that we're told to do this in silence. We're told this not to be prideful of it, although it is absolutely necessary. I'm not going to try to tell everybody not to donate, because both the Ottawa Parish and St. Andrew's College depend on this in some ways. So, but almsgiving is part of our spiritual life, praying and then helping other people. Or sometimes almsgiving is called lending money to God. God will repay us when we need something. So we lend money to God so that He can help everybody else in His church, but we shouldn't make a big deal of it. And then we have, of course, fasting. And the fasting in the New Testament, when you fast, this is 6:16. When you fast, do not look dismal like the hypocrites, for they disfigure their faces that their fasting may be seen by men. Hypocrite is a great Greek word, which means actor, like on stage or in movies. You don't know how this actor in the movie actually feels about what they're saying, but they have to portray a certain thing. So they move their face around to look like what they should look like. It's like deciding how you're going to. So you don't do this when you fast. You also don't look dismal. You also supposed to wash, because in the Old Testament, a lot of times fasting was a sign of um, despair, a sign of worry, and a sign of almost anger with other people, or sometimes even anger with God. But it was the kind of understanding that God is punishing me, so I have to look the part, that God will see how terrible I look. So fasting involved no washing, no combing of hair, no worrying about your beard, um, and um, and stuff like that, and not changing your clothes. And so basically walking around so people can see you fasting and also probably smell you coming. So that was the Old Testament style of fasting, and it's tied to mourning and dismay and all that. In the New Testament, we have to remember that we are not make believe Old Testament people. We are living in the New Testament. What is the New Testament about? The New Testament is about the goodwill, the good news of God. The good news that Jesus brought us. What good news? We have eternal life. How? Because God loves us. Why? Because He resurrected from the dead. Who is supposed to be angry, dismal, and despairing when this is what is the reality? So that's of course in practical terms in the Orthodox Church, it's got to do with the fact that we don't fast on Easter, right? We don't fast on Pascha because it's the joy. But even now, when it's Lent, we have to remember this Lent is just a period of preparation and a period of training for us. In our real life, you might say, in our true understanding, Christ is risen every day, you could say. Christ has destroyed death, and so let us rejoice. So our fasting, like our almsgiving, like our prayer, has to be done with humility but with joy. And so in the New Testament, it's fasting is not so much tied with despair and suffering, but it's tied with um, joy, and it's expected. Jesus says, "When you fast, you will do this, and when you fast, you will wash your face and not show that you are suffering." But He doesn't say, "If you feel like fasting, do this." He says, "When you fast." So fasting is expected, but fasting changes, and part of it is in the writings of Saint Paul. Um, I don't have notes here. I'm probably not going to look them up. But in St. Paul's works, in many places, he uses imagery of war, putting armor on for yourself, the right kind of armor. He also uses imagery of racing, because don't forget who invented the Olympic Games. And the Olympic Games were not, basketball and soccer. They were athletics and wrestling. So they talk about wrestling and they talk about track and field, what we would say now. And we're told to live a good life by saying you have to compete by the rules. If you want to win the race and get into heaven, using that kind of imagery, you have to follow the rules. And so fasting becomes not a thing in itself, where if we are spiritual enough, we can fast better, and by fasting better, we can show we're better Christians. That's not it. What it means is fasting becomes a type of training which lets us put more emphasis on spiritual matters, which lead us to be better Christians for both ourselves and for those around us. And so, what we do, either by our actions or by what we eat, uh, is a type of both controlling our own will and controlling our own desires, for a better purpose, but also training ourselves that if we can avoid certain things, we will train ourselves to say no and avoid bigger things. This is why you have, in more modern times, you could say, we're going to fast from meat. We're not going to go to McDonald's for a Big Mac. And the point is, if you can't say no to a Big Mac for 40 days, are you strong enough to say no when, um, um,
Greater temptations
when
come.
you can steal money from somebody, or when you meet an elderly person carrying a bag of money, or an elderly person in a very, very good car, and you probably think, this person is 80 years old, I could probably take him and take the car. Well, yes, you probably could, but is that your Christian? Is that an attitude? No. So you could say, I'm not going to steal the car from this old person because it's against the law, but maybe that's not strong enough, or because it's morally the wrong thing to do. But you could also say, I'm fasting, and people who fast do not need things like cars that are stolen from older people. So there's many, many ways of controlling your understanding of society, and it comes down to building a stronger, more moral compass. Um, and so by sometimes what seems like arbitrary choices, we'll look at it a little bit later in the talk, by simply arbitrary choices of what we should eat and what we should not eat, we are training ourselves to make the right choices, so that we can make the right choice when it becomes something uh, more important. So um, the fact that it comes down to moral choices is emphasized very often by the church fathers and other places, even sometimes in scripture. Um, John Chrysostom, the great author of our liturgy, and basically one of the early biblical scholars, he once talked about fasting, and he's quoted as having said that if you are abstaining from meat, that means you should, first of all, not bite the back of your brother. Like, you should not be a backbiter, and you should not be saying nasty things, and you should not be um, attacking your brother verbally, because both of these things are tied together, because you need your mouth for both of these things. So if you're controlling eating the sausages, you should also control biting and attacking verbally other people, which makes it really hard sometimes when you have an annual church meeting in the middle of Great Lent, which is why you try to get that done early. This year, the Lent is late enough; it should be okay. But still, I'm saying this partly because I just had a consistory meeting yesterday. I was part of, and God let us forgive us who are serving on the consistory. So the things should be done in secret. Things are for training, and things are to focus us on Christ. We make moral choices. And we don't have to talk always about morality, but things that we are doing in Lent sometimes could seem like self-punishment, but we shouldn't do this, because it's that image of the race, the image of the Olympic Games. If you want to be an Olympic athlete, do you sleep in the morning? No, you get up early, because you have to run probably twice a day, and it's good to do it first at like 6 a.m. and then at 4, 5, 6 o'clock in the evening. So getting up in the morning, winter or summer, and running at 6 a.m. could be seen as self-punishment, or especially if your priest tells you to do it, it'd probably be, masochism or something to do this. But for an Olympic athlete who wants to improve and be a good Olympic runner, this is normal, and this is okay, and there's nothing wrong with it, and it helps focus the mind on important things. So this is what St. Paul uses these athletic examples quite often. And so when we're looking at Lent, we can see ourselves as there's many explanations of asceticism. That's sort of what this is about. It is focusing on proper things and leaving other things behind. That's the one of the easy explanations. Another one is spiritual athleticism, meaning doing things that are hard, because they will produce good things for us in the future. We want to focus on what is good to do and avoid sin. Um, um, Self-disciplining ourselves by fasting, like an athlete self-disciplines himself by running 10 kilometers before he has breakfast and has the longer run later on in the day. That's a different thing again, right there. So that's part of it. in some ways, fasting is also a way of reminding ourselves that our strength comes from God. Because if we don't eat that much or don't eat anything, or monks would say, and we'll get into that a little bit later, if you don't eat meat, you become somewhat physically weaker, which means you have less temptation to beat up somebody. You have less temptation to exploit a weaker person. You have better understanding of how people who have health challenges, or as now that we're in the pandemic,
COVID time.
everybody understands the word preconditions, right? We have preconditioned health concerns. Um, People, we will understand our neighbors who have these kinds of things if we realize that after a couple of days of eating nothing or just bread and water, we will start to feel weak also. And the weakness, in a way, reminds us that there is something better coming. This life, whether it is living in beautiful Ottawa or whether it is living in difficult places in Africa or something, this life is not the whole life. We are not citizens of this country more than we are citizens of the kingdom of God. So fasting reminds us that our life is in the kingdom of God for a number of reasons. One, there is no, is no lunch buffets in heaven. Although one of the great things about the book of Revelation talks about 12 trees, and each tree produces all of one fruit for that you can eat, and it's for 1 month, and it gives you all the nutrition you need. And then when it stops, the next tree starts. So as long as you're living in heaven, you never need food. That's what it's saying. It's not saying that there are 11, 12 kinds of fruit in heaven, but still, fruit is seen as a symbol of what we eat in heaven. So it's always permissible during Lent. Steaks and hamburgers and pork and kubasa. I think many Ukrainians think there's kubasa in heaven, but probably not. It's not mentioned anywhere in Scripture. Fruit is honey, sometimes milk, but anyway. So there's that kind of hint at what is there, what is not.
But
Um, yes,
if I just may interrupt you, that mentioning about land of milk and honey had been
yes,
even given to Moses and Abraham,
yeah,
mentioning about the promised land. So it's a milk and honey. It's a
yes.
place of fullness, of
The
completeness.
place of fullness, place of everything. I mean, and it's interesting because uh, the the understanding of these terms. I mean, honey has been found that you can just leave it anywhere and it pretty much will stay okay. They found honey in in the pyramids of Egypt that people have actually tried, and it actually tastes like honey. It's dried up because all the moisture is gone, but um, but then milk in a desert. If you get milk in the morning, you got to drink it before lunch because it's done. That's it. Or you have to learn to drink the sour milk, which is another thing. But uh, but uh, but in heaven, there's no expiry dates, and honey is a very good example of that. But also milk is something that um, is very good, but it's for it's part of paradise. But anyway, so in the New Testament, we are training. We are trying to become more spiritual and not live by physical strength only. Um, it leads to and it also helps us control other things like entertaining things and everything else. Um, it may be going to a party or going to a dance or something on a Saturday night takes energy. You're going to eat well, but it is a bit stressful. If you're eating less, you might say to yourself, "It's Lent. I'm going to stay home and read Psalms that night." You never know; that could happen. So um, the other side of this about Lent, um, Orthodox monks who are in monasteries never eat meat. So you might say it's always Lent, but it's not always Lent. Meat is just not part of their lifestyle. Why? Because um, they're supposed to be men, well, and nuns too, the women, but men especially, they're supposed to be living peacefully. And monasticism is very interesting because it tries to turn certain things on their head. Because if you are a soldier, or if you are a mighty man of business, or if you are whatever, an athlete, or whether whatever you're a very strong farmer, whatever you live, your strength is very important to you, and your control of your environment is a very important thing to you. And then when you're told you're not supposed to eat meat, it is hopefully makes you more respectful of others. It makes you more peaceful in general. The monks go very strongly into this, saying we don't fight, we can't fight. We have become monks. We cannot join the army. Although there's a few times in history this has happened. 1453, the Muslim conquest of Constantinople, the monks ran out of their monasteries and grabbed weapons and went to the front. Uh, didn't ultimately help, but anyway, well, there's a whole argument whether that's a good thing or not. But still, um, but monks are supposed to be peaceful. So one of the things they say, how to stay peaceful in your life, it's avoid eating meat that has red blood in it, because red blood reminds you of war. It reminds you of butchering animals. It reminds you of all sorts of things like that. So that becomes the first thing. So the default, as I said, the default position is that it's a complete abstinence. We don't eat anything. By definition, that has to be short. Also, the canons of our church are very specific that we cannot have a total fast of no eating at all on Sunday, and on Saturdays usually, because Sunday is the day of the resurrection. And there are some neighbors that actually call Sunday the day of the resurrection. That's, of course, exactly what it is. So we have to eat something on Sunday. If we don't eat anything on Sunday, we're not actually fasting. We are starving to death because there's a famine. If you have one piece of bread, the church fathers would say, you have one piece of bread, you try to keep it until Sunday and eat it on Sunday, if that's all you have to eat the whole week. Saturday also is a preparation. We're not in that situation, but I'm just using those extremes. Saturday is also the day of the preparation for the resurrection, and it's the day that Jesus was in the tomb, freeing people in Sheol, as the Old Testament will say, in the place of waiting for the coming of the Messiah. So by definition, even if we are very extreme fasters, our fasting is really only 5 days long, followed by 2 days of light eating. But that's the default position. Clearly, those of us who are working and those of us who are not teaching theology but actually doing hard work, especially, they need more than just water for 5 days. And it's very hard for people, especially if they have different conditions and stuff. So we can eat. But what should we avoid? What should we avoid eating? It has to be something that's important to us, something that we're used to, something that takes an effort. And this is not like other Christians that famously, pick something that they really like and give it up for Lent. But that's nice if it's some kind of bad thing, like smoking or marijuana or heroin. You should stop that for Lent. But if it's food that is good, that's not what we're doing. We're not giving up some kind of food just because we want to do that. We give up specific things because it shows solidarity with the church. Because first of all, if we start from the scratch, cannibalism is forbidden the whole year. So we are fasting 365 days a year from eating other human beings. That's the basic one. But what looks like a human being? I find it very hard to take that in Africa they hunt apes, because those apes are, 97% exactly the same as we are, and supposedly that meat is considered a delicacy in some parts of Africa. I find that very difficult to understand. But for Orthodox people in sort of Europe and the Middle East, where the church is very strong, it's what is the closest to human beings? It's animals that have red blood. So if we're not going to give up everything, we give up killing other animals. And as I said before, monks don't eat meat ever. So when we are in Great Lent, we are trying to be a little bit more spiritual and maybe taking examples from monks, and we won't eat meat during Great Lent. It's an interesting thing. I know Father Ihor knows this. Maybe some others have read it somewhere. Priests, any kind of priest, monks, married priests, are forbidden from hunting, because it's hard to go on Thursday and shoot a bear or a moose, or God forbid, a nice pretty little deer, and then cut it all up, take it home, and then on Sunday preach peace and love. So hunting is forbidden for priests, but priests who are living in the world when it's not Lent can eat meat. That's sort of cooperation. We cooperate one with another. That is seen not as being hypocritical. It's seen as being just a gradient. But if we give up meat, that's the first start. After that, there's a time many Orthodox will give up dairy products. And oddly, like in Canada, dairy products, even in the Orthodox Byzantine world, include chicken eggs. Chicken is meat, but eggs. So eggs and dairy products. Why? Because it's exploitation of animals. Now, this is a very delicate one because if you're, I've never lived in Ukraine, but I'm sure it's the same there. But in Canada, especially the prairies, when people came to Canada, they all had small farms and they all had chickens. Well, chickens, you can let them live another month or two till Lent is over, but what do you do with the eggs? Well, sometimes they're stored and cool. Sometimes they're baked. This is where you get all these baking, which is full of all kinds of eggs. And there's one person from Ukraine said, "Well, what you do with milk is you make cheese. And if you get too much cheese, what you do is you sell the milk to non-Orthodox people. Like every village has Jewish people, so that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that because it's a sin to take the milk and throw it in the river, which you see every once in a while in France when the French farmers are on strike. So you can't destroy stuff. So uh, there has been a custom amongst farming communities where they avoid eating meat because you can postpone killing an animal, but you can't postpone the eggs that are being laid or the milk that needs to be milked from the cows. And whether you can make cheese. This is why Easter is full of cheese. One, because we don't eat it during the regular Lent, but also if you're a farmer, you have a lot of cheese and dairy products and eggs built up, and so you use them all for those 2 weeks or 40 days after Easter. Um, Things like putting milk and cheese down a cold well for 3, 4 weeks if you don't have a refrigerator. Nowadays in Canada, we have all the luxuries we need to protect stuff, and we don't raise our own eggs anyway. So it's easy to avoid buying eggs, but it's not even easy to avoid having eggs if you have chickens. So, but still, after meat comes dairy products and eggs, and these two levels are kind of the level that Orthodox people doing a serious. This is enough to make a serious demand upon Orthodox people living in society, because there's a lot of temptations and it's difficult and it's a change in diet, and this is as far as most go, and we shouldn't become judgmental of one another. Um, One of the I think maybe John Chrysostom, but maybe not, but maybe somebody later. I remember reading about fasting, saying the first thing we should avoid in Lent is looking at other people's plates, which if you're living in a student residence, that's a really important thing. You take what you're supposed to take and you don't look at what other people are taking, and if you bump into the priest in the supermarket, please don't check out what he's buying. Maybe he's buying it so he can give eggs to poor people that come to the door, because if you're really really poor and have to beg for food, you're already half fasting, so have some eggs, have some protein. So anyway, so the Orthodox put Lent in kind of fasting in Lent is like very many things in Orthodoxy. In the Orthodox world, um, they see Orthodoxy as being the proper belief, and so they see errors on both sides, which means they see heretics on this side and that side. In the middle is beautiful Orthodoxy. That's the way we think. Whether it's about how we're supposed to sing, how we're supposed to worship, what we think of the sacraments, how we explain the Holy Trinity, we know that we have the right belief. So but we are thus centralists. We are not extremists. And so it's the same with fasting. We are not vegans. There are even I had an opportunity a couple of weeks ago. I'm doing kind of a tutoring. I'm tutoring a student in canon law, so we were going through certain canons, and there's actually I didn't notice that the first time I read it, but this time I read it, for the last few times. Um, there are a number of canons that deal with fasting, and they're saying You can fast from meat, dairy products. You can be basically what we would call a vegetarian or even a vegan, but you can never condemn the eating of meat. Why? Because animals are good. It's a good creation. God created us. It's the same sort of thing about you want to be a monk. You can be a monk and live by yourself and not be married, but you can never tell people that orthodoxy demands that you not be married, and you who are orthodox are not, you who are married are not orthodox. That's a heresy. It's actually one of the things listed in the canons for throwing out a bishop. Bishop disqualifies himself from being a bishop by saying marriage is not a good thing. Everybody should be a monk like me. So same sort of thing here. We can't. We are not vegans who are on principle against meat or dairy products, because meat and dairy products were produced by God for us. Now, you know, vegans are often accuse us of being speciesists, right? Meaning we hate other species. We want to eat cattle and pigs. Well, yes, we do. They're very tasty. But on the other, especially now, this is already what the third week of Lent or second week of Lent. The end of it, it's already starting to feel like Lent after a few days. So I don't know about you, but when I stop eating meat, the first 3 or 4 days are really great. It's like, I don't eat so much meat and it doesn't bother me. Oh, it's very nice. I feel so much better. And then after a while, it's like, oh, maybe I could lighten the mood a little bit. I tell you about my own fasting experience as a joke, as a warning. When I lived in Ottawa, there used to be this place called Nate's, and now there's a place there, I forgot the name of it, but Montreal smoked meat. When I lived in Eastern Canada, Montreal smoked meat was one of my favorite things. And you can't get it really in Winnipeg good stuff, so I've almost forgotten about it. But when in the middle of Lent, I would wake up in the morning saying, I got to have a Montreal smoked meat sandwich today. And it was a big struggle, and somehow I would get by it. Somebody would phone with their problems or something, and I would forget about the smoked meat. But it would come up probably 2 or 3 times during Great Lent. Now in Great Lent, I'm in Winnipeg. There's no good smoked meat here anyway, Montreal smoked meat. But I wake up about the third, fourth week, sometime in the middle of the night. I will wake up going, I have to get some Manitoba cut Mennonite sausage, which is only made in Manitoba, and I have to have some of that today. And I have to fight about having that sausage for maybe a day or two, and then it goes away. But it's like temptations come up in funny ways, and so I had to mention. So we are not, first of all, wanton consumers who eat anything we want anytime because it doesn't matter, and we are important, and we will do what we want. We do not do that. We what we do is we are in between. We are not eat anything you want anytime because it doesn't matter, and we are not eat only peanuts and lettuce because God will hate you if you eat beef. That's not true. God told Noah that you can eat. Part of the fact of eating meat in the Old Testament, it's true. Seventh-day Adventists who are really big on the Old Testament, they will sometimes say that veganism is the true way of being. It's because it was up until the flood. It's true. There's no mention of eating meat in paradise. There's no mention of eating meat by Adam and Eve, and even by Noah and Cain and everything else before the flood. But after the flood, God gives them the right to eat meat, and it's mentioned in Scripture. Just because it's not mentioned doesn't mean they didn't eat meat earlier, but at least you can have an argument that there might not be. It might have been fasting then from meat. But the point was, in the Old Testament, meat eating was seen as a guard against paganism, because the pagans worshipped the bull. The pagans worshipped the trees too, but still, they worshipped the bull. They worshipped different animals. They worshipped the cat in Egypt. Of course, most people don't eat cats anyway, but Noah was told by God to eat meat, and this was seen as a type of a vaccine against starting to think animals are God. Because if animals are God, how can we grab them, kill them, and eat them? So killing an animal and eating it was a type of way of ensuring that we will not become pagans and start worshiping animals. In the Old Testament, we were told not to eat the blood of the animal because the Old Testament idea was the soul was in the blood. And so the soul belongs to God. So in the Old Testament, they would kill an animal, drain all the blood out of it. But I'm not an expert in how to butcher animals, but since I'm forbidden to do it as a Christian Orthodox priest, but I didn't know how before either. But But still, you bleed it and then you wash it, especially with salt water and stuff like that. So blood is a big issue for various reasons. So meat with blood in it, or red meat in general, or anything. What it basically doesn't mean red meat, white meat, pork, beef. It's all the same. Antelope, chickens. I love phoning Chinese restaurants because I say no meat, and they say, okay, we'll give you chicken. No, no chicken, no chicken either. Anyway, but you have no meat, and so you because they walk upon the same earth that we do. To a certain extent, we are related to them. It's much closer. Fish, on the other hand, are from under the water. Fish are taking something out of the river or the sea or the lake. In the Byzantine world, was seen basically the same as digging up a potato or a carrot. Of course, potatoes weren't in the Byzantine world. They were Christopher Columbus took them back to Europe. But anyway, it's a vegetable. Vegetables are seen as plants that grow out of the earth, but don't move around, don't have blood. So that's the thing you eat. And so with plants, you have fish. Fish are closer to plants, closer to potatoes than to animals in the Byzantine mind. Especially the kind of fish that don't swim around, the ones that sit on the bottom, like lobster, shrimp, clams, and scallops, and those sorts of things. Those things are considered more plant-like than anything else. And if you think about it, look at a river clam, look at a rock, look at a potato. It's all the same. So this is the mentality, the mind. I'm not saying that it's exactly the same, but still. So how does to the nitty? Are there any general questions before we get into nitty gritty things, or maybe I'll continue. You want the questions at the end? But
Actually,
yeah,
Ocha,
yes,
Simon Kuklevsky from Montreal had
yes,
typed in the question there, and you partly answered the question, and that
yes,
is, why does the church allow the consumption on invertebrates during Lent?
yes.
You just answered them
Yeah,
because it is.
it's more detailed. I mean, I can get into it. I mean, the yeah.
Sorry.
Some priest told me a joke. I don't know if it was you or I don't want to. I don't. It might have been you. Maybe it was a different priest though. I can't remember. And he was in Saskatchewan one day and he was preaching about Lent and everything else, or someplace in the West, and said, yes, you can't eat fish with backbones. This is another detail. You can't eat fish with backbones, and and uh, and the parish president said, "Don't worry, Father. What we're serving today, we took all the bones out, not just the backbone, before we cooked it. So don't worry about it." Yeah. But anyway, the point is what is more lifelike? So um, things that are really lifelike, like what like us. We can neither wound ourselves. We cannot eat other people. Number one. Number two, we can't eat things that look like us when they're dead. Like if you cut into a rat or a pig or a cow, the insides look more or less like us, and they have red blood, and they are warm-blooded, and they walk on the earth like we do. So that's meat. Fish, it doesn't walk on the earth; it swims in the water. Um, so it's in a way, it's all right to eat. Um, some people, especially in Greece, where they have fish all the time, um, they start to during Lent over the centuries. It has developed a understanding that you can't eat uh, fish, especially if you eat them all the time, because fish um, have backbones and fish move around. So they're starting to get further away from potatoes and closer to
Animals.
rabbits and chickens. So you should avoid it. But amongst the Slavic peoples, in the normal understanding of things, that distinction wasn't always made because one is there's not a lot of shrimp in northern Russia, or even in parts of Ukraine or in Manitoba, and so um, when it said fish, they meant fish, and so um, the normal kind of fasting food was pickled herring in many places, and any kind of fish you could catch was fine. In Greece, it was much more sticky, no backbones. And so some people think that it applies to Orthodox Ukrainians. It might, but it never has been enforced because it was impossible to do.
If I just
So,
may interject, Oche,
proszę.
if I just may interject very
Yes,
quickly, we had a couple of years ago, well, before COVID, of course, in Ottawa, we have this Orthodox Vespers on Sunday night.
yes,
So we would go to different churches and different churches. And of course, in our parish, I was just telling everybody, no milk, no
yes,
fish, even. And our parish would put really nice meal with baraniki and perishke that would be baked and so on. But we would go to a Serbian church, and they would serve fish and
yes,
wine on Sunday, like
yes,
Sunday night. So we were like, whoa, what's going on there and stuff like that. But it's interesting. In their understanding of it, fish is allowed.
yeah,
Well, I was talking to even to some Serbian friends of mine, and who are priests, and they're saying, no, no, no. In our tradition, fish is allowed, especially
yeah,
on the weekends. In the
yeah, and I,
monasteries, might
yeah.
might be a different practice.
Yeah, I think it's fish is was traditionally allowed in Ukraine and in Russia, in Ukraine because when the pioneers came to Canada, there was a high percentage of very stubborn and conservative Bukovinians, and my grandparents. And the thing is, you nobody in the entire even in Canada up until maybe 15 years ago, they would write calendars with Lenten periods would be marked by little fish heads on the places that you couldn't eat fish, which was or that fish was allowed but other things were not allowed. So when you came to Great Lent, you had 45, 48 days of fish heads on top of your calendar. That has already stopped because we're trying to be more Greek. But I think to a certain extent we have to. There's nothing wrong with stopping at meat and then dairy products. But if you want to go further, right? I mean, if you're a monk living in a monastery, fish is only for big holidays, like Sundays and Blahovishchina, the Annunciation,
Pronunciation.
and days like Lazarus Saturday and Palm Sunday. Well, Sunday for sure. So fish was on big days like that, and so I think that's got into some parish life too, like you said about the Serbians. I think that's probably what they're doing. And wine or other alcohol, although wine is usually the one that they talk about because they don't assume you're going to be drinking vodka and whiskey during Lent. But when wine is allowed, so is other alcohol. But alcohol was only allowed. It's not an animal thing or anything, but alcohol was forbidden during Lent because it clouds the judgment and doesn't allow you to make the right decisions. What you're trying, the whole point of why you're fasting is to prepare yourself to do good decisions. So alcohol was only for big days, and I think this is why if the Serbians are hosting the entire Orthodox community for Sunday of Orthodoxy, this is a big holiday, and of course you're going to give wine to your guests, and there's nothing wrong with that. I don't think they brought out the raki or anything like that. So just wine is okay, but wine was not a daily thing in the monastery. It was always for holidays, and when it was not Lent, it was more maybe almost daily. So um, fish with a backbone can be restricted if you are a monk or if you're living in Greece where everybody has fish all the time anyway.
Mhm.
It's
Or
odd because the invertebrates, because they don't have a backbone, that's the whole point. They don't walk around, and lobster walk around, crab walk around. Octopus is also considered to be a vertebrate. It swims around all over the place, but because it doesn't have a backbone, it doesn't resemble an animal. It's further away from being a chicken or a cow, so it's considered also basically vegetables. You have to pull it out of the water, and uh, considering that our Lord and Savior walked on land with us, but also walked on water, it's this concept that water and land are really the same thing. It's just one's harder to walk on, and so you dig vegetables out of the ground and you pick up lobsters off the ground that's covered with water. So um, so those were all allowed. I think also, and this is just my personal opinion, it may not be Orthodox concept or not, but I think it has a lot to do with the Old Testament kosher laws. fish that swam around with a backbone was considered kosher by the Jews of the Old Testament, and eating stuff off the ground was like eating bugs, and bugs are not allowed, and so it's unkosher, which meant, of course, then shrimp and lobster and scallops were cheap. Nobody wanted them in Israel, and so poor people ate them, and so it was not prestigious at all. And so, if you need protein during Lent, eat some scallops. Don't eat, tuna, or don't eat beef, of course, for sure. So there was this plan. The stuff that was considered unclean in the Old Testament. I mean, I'm not talking about dogs, but or pigs, but seafood, seafood that has no backbone was eaten by Christians everywhere if they could catch them, but they were considered to be very poor food, very second rate, and very much like a vegetable. So you can go to any kind of strict monastery, and one day they'll have beans, but the next day they'll have shrimp during Lent, if they can afford it. And if you're anyway, so but these things, again, scallops, shrimp, a lot of these things are not available in lots of countries. I mean, now they're available because you can go down to Sobeys or whatever and you have them. But the So anyway, that's
Okay.
why the invertebrates were considered to be edible and possible. But of course, it's impossible to explain. I remember at a Orthodox clergy conference once, one of the priests told the people that one of the priests told the other priest that in his parish in Saskatchewan, he ordered in special by some kind of grocery delivery guy. He ordered in lobster and shrimp for Lent into this small town in Saskatchewan, and the whole town heard about it. And so it was like the people were shocked. It's like, so Orthodox priests just eat lobster and shrimp during Lent. I mean, eating canned tuna sandwiches with onions is not good. And he had to explain, no, it's okay. You can eat tuna, but on the other hand, he didn't because he wanted to be really strict. Canned tuna with green onions is not allowed in that. If you're following the Greek understanding of backbone, cannot be used. It cannot be eaten then. I first of all, um, um, in my, I would be hypocritical to say you have to stop eating meat with chicken with a backbone. Not chicken, but fish with a backbone, because that's my whole life in the Orthodox Church. I've always had chicken with not chicken, fish with a backbone during Lent. I find that
There's
it's greater. But on the other hand, there are certain days that are more important. So I don't know how much time we have, but I could spend a couple minutes sort of on these two things. There's
okay.
um, there we have, we have, people on one side and the other side. Like I said, sort of the extremes on both sides. There are some priests that talk about, that Lent is an old-fashioned thing and we shouldn't bother with it. There are still some of those left. There were more of them in the 80s than there are now. And then there are those who want to just drink water and during Lent. But we have to be somewhere in between. And I think a very good line is, um, meat is one thing, fish is a different thing, right? Even Old English has that. Um, in English, there's a saying in English about something that you don't know what to do about something, and you say it's neither fish nor fowl. Even in ancient, not ancient, but old Roman Catholics and old Anglicans in England, they still show the difference between chickens and fish. And if you can't tell, if it's something in between chicken and fish, it's better just leave it alone because we don't know what it is, right? So that is sort of the basis of old style Roman Catholic fasting um, and serious Orthodox fasting. It's famous in Canada, Roman Catholic fasting, because they decided what was the difference between fish and chicken. Was we believe animals walk on the earth or fly in the air above the earth. You can't eat those during Lent. Fish are in the water, underwater, so they're like vegetables. The Roman Catholics were slightly different. They said, Um, they said anything that's in the water can be eaten. So frogs, the French delicacy frog's legs was Lenten, I think, in the Catholic Church, but is not Lenten and not allowed in the Orthodox Church because they are on the earth. And beavers, which spend their lives underwater, were allowed by the bishops of Quebec, and then that spread all across Canada. So the voyageurs that came to Manitoba were looking for beaver for the pelts, but also for something chewy to eat during Lent, because it was allowed. I think beavers are closer to chickens than they are to fish, but that's the Orthodox sort of view. But anyway, I'm getting a little bit carried away here. But the from most luxurious, that should be the first thing to leave behind, meat. The most nutritious, and one canon explanation of a canon with explanations from the 14th century says the greasiness of the meat is what gives you the taste, and that should be avoided during Lent, because it's too rich and too luxurious. So meat is first to be left, dairy and eggs, then possibly if you're in Greece or you're really serious, fish with a backbone. Then you have after that seafood, which nobody really fasts with or against, and then plants. And the plants are any kind of plant, and we don't get into this thing if it's sweet, it's no good. Sugar is a plant, so it's like you can have chocolate as long as it doesn't have milk in it, which means if you have super great chocolate, it's good, but if you have milk chocolate, it's not so good. It has milk. But plants, which is good when you're going to a monastery. If you're a Canadian visiting a monastery, take maple syrup candy with you, because any monk or nun will eat it at any time, and you're never going to insult somebody because they know it's from a tree. I went to a number of monasteries in Greece, and there wasn't one monastery that didn't know what maple syrup candy was. I think Greeks from Canada take it there all the time. So have that around with you if you're traveling. But anyway, plants. Then after that is no plants. Then there's this what's called dry cooking, which means or dry food, which means no cooking, no oil. So there's cooked plants, and then there is not cooked plants. Then there are water and simple bread. The idea of getting your slice of prosciutto on Sunday, dividing it up into 5 little pieces, and eating that every morning and drinking water during the day. That's uh, that's serious fasting. And then there is total fasting, which usually includes water because you don't want to die after 2 days or 3 days. So just drinking water. And fortunately, I wasn't at this very strict monastery in Lent, but I was there 2 weeks before Lent, and they were giving an explanation to the monks, which I sat in on. And the young monks who had just started coming, they were told that during the Great Lent first week, you will be given water to drink, but you must drink it room temperature or warm, because cold water is too refreshing, too good, and will make you feel too strong and too refreshed. So it gets to the point where, the problem is here we cannot be judging each other, because if you start to say, look, I'm avoiding meat and dairy products and eggs, and you're terrible because you're eating fish, you have to keep in your mind that there are monks being told by their superiors that they should drink cold water and they should drink warm water because cold water is too pleasant. That is already weirdo fasting, or extreme monastic fasting only for certain periods. And then, of course, there's the total fast, which for all Orthodox goes from midnight until the time you take communion, midnight till about 11 in the morning. That's a total fast that most people can handle. And if you're taking blood pressure pills or something, you can take your pills with a little water too, right? So the church is not trying to oppress and torture people. They're trying to give people a chance to exercise their moral choices, to do the right thing, and to train themselves to avoid sin. So that's sort of the basic thing. And then there's the days, right? So obviously, um, drinking warm water, well, you can't do that for a long, long time without eating something else. So how does this work in practical terms? Even though there's always priests, I'm assuming there are not a lot of other priests watching, but there might be a priest that that might say everybody has to follow the entire thing all the time. What are the practical ways that are looked at? One thing is Sunday is the day of the resurrection. There is no such thing as complete fasting on Sunday. So like I said, if you have something to eat it on Sunday. So those people who are not eating fish, Sunday is a good time to have salmon with a backbone and all that. Those of you who are having trouble, you have children that want meat, they want chicken, make a chicken on Sunday, or cook a chicken on Sunday, even though that's against the rules, really. But that Sunday is the easiest day of Lent. So do what is easiest. Um, put cheese on your broccoli if you have to, at least once in a while. There is that kind of, not leeway. It's not an official rule, but the idea is Sunday is a very mild fasting day. But still, you should be fasting at least from meat for the entire thing if you're taking it seriously. Second thing is Saturday is the Old Testament day of rest. It's also the day that Christ was in the tomb and preparing to free people from hell or from Sheol, as they would call it then. And so it's also a lighter day. It's a day that a liturgy can be held, and when you have a liturgy with communion, you have lunch after. In the monasteries and in the families, I mean, you don't go to church on Sunday and go to communion and then go home and not eat, or go to the parish and not have lunch if the parish is having lunch. So you eat on Sunday, you eat on Saturday. Um, Friday is the most serious day because it's the day of the crucifixion. So all Fridays in monasteries usually are complete fasts, or at least fast until the evening because that's already Saturday, and so they would eat after Vespers, after dark, if they had to. But usually they would be counseled to fast until Sunday after liturgy, or Saturday after liturgy. Friday is the toughest day of Lent, and so um, that would be the day that serious people might just eat what they call the dry diet: peanuts and lettuce with peanuts, dry bread, and lettuce with no dressing on or just a complete fast. Wednesday is another day of heavy fasting or serious fasting because it's the day of Christ's betrayal by Judas. So it leads, as Saturday points to Sunday, so Saturday inherits some of the easygoingness of the fast. Um, Wednesday points to Friday, so Wednesday has part of the more stringent fasting. Monday is an interesting day. Monday is an ordinary day, a Lenten day for most people, but Monday is the day of the angels. And what do we call the monastic life? We call it the angelic life. And so the monks are trying to live like angels. They're not angels, but they are trying to live like angels. Again, no children, no sex, that sort of thing, but also very scantily eat. Angels don't eat. But as some church fathers say, neither do demons. So just not eating is not always a good thing. But anyway, so monks have a strict fast like Wednesday. They also have it on Monday because that's kind of their day. But you and I, most of us that are listening are not monks, or all of us that are listening are not monks. Monday is not particularly a hard day. Um, Tuesday, same thing. So you have Monday, Tuesday, Thursday are ordinary days, which if you're serious about fasting, you could avoid meat and dairy. But if you have, and Saturday and Sunday are easier days, which means if you have young kids and you want to be, of course, young children can't be forced to fast if they're, because they have to make their own choice. And if they're not 8 years old yet, they can't make their own choice. So it's another whole question. But if you have, if your doctor has warned you that you should keep your protein levels up or something because you have some kind of illness, you could have, your chicken or something on Sunday, but don't have it on Friday because that's already the most day strictest day. But for most people, eating fish on Friday is possible, or at least at that time, eating seafood and stuff like that is very possible.
Ocem,
Yes,
I have to, sorry, there's a couple questions here, and
sure.
we kind of coming to an end of our
Oh, good.
presentation.
Yeah, I can get carried away on these things, but I usually try to avoid talking about the nitty gritty of what fasting is and stuff. But there was indication that that was important to some people, so I have to
Mhm.
explain it directly. But the
So,
other thing, if you want a really serious understanding of this, one of the places to is buy a Greek Lenten cookbook at a monastery or in a Greek store, and they'll have pages of this at the end just to remind you which recipes you can use on what days. So you don't have to believe me; you can see it in writing.
No, Oche,
Okay, I should.
I have no problem believing you, Oche. You know, so,
Okay,
so knowing you for what almost 30 years, so
yeah.
I have no problem believing you.
But the thing is, just because I understand, I don't want anybody ever to think that I spend Fridays drinking warm water, but just that. But I have an understanding of how it looks to different Orthodox. Even though for me it's meat and dairy that I try to avoid, and that's basically it. Yeah.
So, your explanation about the Lenten journey as an athletic training,
Yes,
a
yes,
real Olympic training, I really like it. So
yeah,
we start that journey, unprepared, and we slowly go into it, even before the Lent, and then get
yeah,
into Lent, we go into that training to meet on the journey to meet the resurrection of Christ.
yeah,
This is a very wonderful thing, and it's very
yeah.
nice metaphor when you think about this,
Yeah,
because
it was always one that was close to my heart because when I used to run track, right? So
Mhm.
I used to be a
So
track runner, and then as I got older, I decided I should run marathons. Which, when you're a priest, you don't have time for that. But I did run one marathon, and this is like Lent. You're not ready for the resurrection and living a proper life on the third day of Lent. It's like the third day you're running, you're not going to run a marathon. It takes a
yeah,
long time to get ready for that, and it takes a long
absolutely.
time to change your life around.
So
That's why we
basically,
have
yes.
7 weeks of Lent.
And I think it also that metaphor answers some of the questions that are posed here. So
Hmm.
we are training according to our abilities, you
Yes,
know,
yes,
in our lives, right? When
yeah.
I'm right now 50, I just turned 51, Ocha, and your
Okay,
birthday was on 13th, right, of
yes.
this month. So no Hayalita, Ocha,
Diakuyu, Diakuyu. I
but
won't tell
but
you how old I am.
but I won't tell that either.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
But the whole thing is that we train according to our abilities. When we're young and strong and have a good good strong body, we
yeah.
can do more of ascetic discipline to ourselves.
Hmm.
When we have some prescription medication that need to be taken, a doctor prescribes that you need to have, as you were saying, protein because of the
Yeah.
of diabetes or high blood pressure. We have to
Hmm.
consult with the doctor, not only with the priest, but also priest has to be smart, wise enough to kind of tell the person, listen, those are the prescriptions, right? But
Yeah,
it's for the healthy athletic training,
yeah,
right? But a healthy athletic training when I'm 50, I cannot just pick up and run, and 10,
yeah.
12 kilometers right away.
Well,
It
it's
would take
exactly,
me
and the thing
more
is,
time.
it works the other way with training, right? If you're running year after year after year and year, and you never go past 5 kilometers, you're never going to make 42 kilometers in the race anyway.
That's right. That's
So
right.
you do 1 year of 5 kilometers. Next year you should be doing 10 kilometers in the morning, right?
That's
So,
right.
so it's this thing. If you, like I always joke that I never had in my life any trouble abstaining from liver because I hate liver. But so just because I don't eat liver, that's not enough for Lent, right?
That's right.
You have to go further.
But there's couple of questions here too.
Yes.
Otets Taras Makovsky had asked the following: what if you have diabetes or high blood pressure and are on medication? I think we had answered that question.
Yeah. Well,
You have to be.
medication. I mean, medication is part of what fasting is doing too. Either full fasting or partial fasting is to remind you that you're not all powerful. Because if you're eating everything you want and you're making all the whatever you want to do, and also you tolerate all these meals and you're very very strong and you eat beef every day, um, it's hard to be humble. That's the Byzantine understanding. I'm not saying you or I or Father Makowski. This is this is what we think, but this is the idea that um, when you start to fast, you're doing it to be not humiliated. That would be the priest telling somebody what they have to not eat, but doing stuff on your own to become humble and to realize that you depend on God. But if you're already a diabetic, and especially if you're taking insulin or you're taking injections of medicines, and you're on a strict timetable of when you take what pill, you're already controlling your life a lot, showing you're not a powerful. And I would suspect that if you were to take 2 days off of taking your pills, you would be sick in bed. So you know that you need these things, and you're not an all-powerful person. So you're already 1 or 2 steps into Lent already, you might say, from that point of view, as the sign of humility and the sign of purposely weakening your body to make yourself humble.
Mhm.
When you have when you have a chronic disease, and I would probably say not just diabetes, but even alcoholism, you should be eating high proteins when you're, I'm not a doctor, but I should be careful. But I have read that you should eat protein when you're, you shouldn't be eating pasta all the time when you're an alcoholic. I don't know if that makes any sense or not. You'll have to ask your wife what you.
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
if the doctors are giving you already restrictions, you are already restricted, which means half of what Lent is about has already happened. So you don't have to really hit it so hard. And
We
so, in that way, I mean, if you're looking at that sort of thing, when your diet, you have to talk to your dietitian or your doctor. Um, Still, um, to honor Lent, you should be, more strict with what you're eating on a Friday and a Wednesday. And if you're going to have roast beef because of your health, because the doctor tells you, or liver because you should eat it every week, you should eat liver on Sunday after church. That's the most best time. Uh, not that this for me. There's never a good time to eat liver, but that's the richest thing, the least Lenten. It involves killing an animal. You can't take the liver out of a living animal. It's if you have some kind of medical condition that requires you to eat liver, it should be done on Sunday, as far as I'm concerned. As a Orthodox priest that's uh, been asked about Byzantine rules of fasting.
I just also Ocha kind of wanted to cover this that it's even very interesting when you read the letter of divine ascent of Saint John of the
Yes.
Ladder, Ladder, the book that fourth Sunday dedicated to him during the Great Lent.
Hmm.
It's interesting that abstinence from food is not the first step of first rung of the ladder. First rung of the ladder is of course distancing yourself from the world. So
Exactly.
it kind of feeds into this thing. I also wanted to mention that Simon Kuklowski had a couple questions.
Sure.
Why does church allow the invertebrates during Lent? You already answered that question.
Yeah.
There's also issue that seafood is usually considerably more expensive than meat. Isn't
Exactly.
this a cognitive dissonance when we are called to give our alms, when we call to be
Yeah.
żrtwani?
Yeah.
And
It's
also, I'll finish his questions because
sure.
he has quite a few of them. But also, why are olives permitted but not olive oil? Apparently, it
Yes.
was common to store olive oil in pigskins. I doubt this is true today.
Yeah.
Perhaps some of the regulations are antiquated.
Oh, absolutely. They are, because in some ways, some regulations were made to make things difficult to make sure we know, that it's Lent. Um, but because we have refrigerators and we can import food and everything else. Because don't forget, many people were going through Great Lent after going through a winter and still part of the winter, and they had, not only no seafood, but they had very limited amount of vegetables. There's no such thing as fresh salads. It was uh, coleslaw, pickled cabbage, and cabbage, maybe apples and potatoes. So yeah, it was a difficult thing, but and so yeah, the seafood was um, poor people's food. It was food that was either you could get it or you couldn't get it, but it was not sold for much. Now it's a delicacy, and
Mhm.
not only that, when you're eating lobster, you can use canola oil, margarine, and you can have a beautiful lobster with it's still following the rules, because without butter it doesn't taste that good anyway, as far as I know. What I can remember from when it was when we had it. So, but with the yeah, the invertebrates were it's abnormal to a certain extent that we import lobsters, and we're not import, but we get it from the seacoast, and it's more expensive than meat. Lent was not just eating the cheapest stuff, but it was following specific rules to show we can train ourselves to follow the rules of God and the rules of the church. Another thing that's come up, look, so having the preferred cheaper food becomes super expensive and very prestigious to eat it, um, is odd, and it doesn't fit with the Byzantine understanding. That's for sure. The other sort of thing is, since I became a priest decades ago, there's become better and better fake meat. You can go now and you go to your favorite Mexican restaurant and get a fake meat burrito, and it tastes just as good as any other time. So burritos are now Lenten food, which they never were before. So should fake meat be disallowed because it is luxurious, or should fake meat be allowed because it is not meat; it is plants? I'm of the
True.
opinion that
There's
plants,
lots of there's
it's
lots of
plants, it's plants, right?
there's lots of dissonances, as you were to say it, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Because veggie burger is more expensive than the regular burger, right?
that's right. Yeah, another
So
thing. Yeah.
what do we do?
Well, I
And
mean,
how,
that's the other thing, right? Um, I'm not a very good cook, so I never really talk about that. But I remember meeting a priest. He used. Well, I met him in Ottawa. You might know him too, but I won't say his name. Um, in his mind, he could start talking. He would be like the guy on Forrest Gump about shrimp dishes. There was a priest that could go on with bean dishes and just go on and on forever, and he had every kind of bean dish, and because you could live your whole life and get all the protein you need on dried beans, and just mixing them with something or other. And but anyway, the oils are a little funny because oils are seen as having oil means you are preparing something, and to a certain extent you are cooking it, even though oil on salad is not cooked. So when they say oil permitted, what they really mean is cooked food is permitted. On the days that olive oil is not permitted, what it means is that this is the day to eat peanuts or something like that. Something in your hand. Very simple. Another experience I had was uh, visiting an American monastery where uh, the younger monks were complaining, but they were seeing it as almost a they were complaining, but I think they were very happy that they can do it. They would on Sunday evening on Forgiveness Vespers they would have the Forgiveness Vespers, and then after Forgiveness Vespers they would go to another room, and the Ihuman would give. It was an American place, so it was in gallons. The Ihuman would give a gallon of water in a plastic jug and a pound of salted peanuts, salted nuts, various nuts, because there's more nutrition. And he said there will be no work this week so that you can pray and you can fast. So if you're not working, the cooks are not working either. So there'll be no meals. Don't come to the dining hall. There's no meals. This 1 pound of nuts and this 1 gallon of water is for you. Do whatever you want with it, and we will see you for lunch on Saturday after liturgy. And that was it. And so that's the heavier fasting of the first week. So olive oil means dressing up a meal and having a nicer meal, a cooked meal, which is probably why olives themselves are considered fruit or vegetable. Like I don't know, I've never grown olives, but I would suspect it's a fruit. So fruit is pretty much
permitted.
because it's from eating beans. There's fruit that is eaten anytime during Lent, unless you're on a total fast. You can't get up and have an apple before you go to church for communion, but you can eat fruit anytime, on any day. Although you have some days that are very, very strict, like um, Great Friday before Easter, the day of the actual day of the crucifixion. They were, the basic fasting is bread and prosper and water, or water and dry vegetables after the Vesper service. Which is one of the reasons why amongst Ukrainians sometimes it says in the not the Trebnik, but in the Postavatriod that Vespers on Good Friday could be served as early as noon. So if you have lots of people that can't fast, you could be finished by 1 o'clock and still be following the rules correctly. But yeah.
So normally we serve it normally at what, 2-3 o'clock, right?
Yeah, 2 or 3 o'clock. Yeah,
In the afternoon. Yeah.
yeah, and the parishes that have it at 6 or 7 o'clock for convenience are actually telling people that they should be fasting for like the whole day, which is inconvenient. But it is convenient if you're working and you have to. So this is again, we're not extremists, although there are people who specifically take the week of the Holy Week off from work, just so they
Mhm.
can follow all the services and do all the fasting, because you can't possibly do everything
Yeah.
of Holy Week and fast at the same time and work at the same time. 2 out of 3 maybe, but not 3 out of 3.
Yeah.
Um,
I
so,
think
are there any other questions?
no, I just I'm looking at the wealth of people, the spectrum of people that are watching. From spectrum I mean from one end of Canada to the other.
Oh,
We have
really?
people from Saskatchewan, from
I'm spreading my hairs
Alberta,
everywhere.
from Manitoba, from Quebec, from Ottawa here,
Okay,
from Ontario. So we have a really good audience that's watching, and hopefully
good, good.
they had learned we were able to provide some information for them to think about at least.
Okay,
But the best thing that Ocha that I have learned today is that I did not know that was where that race, that
yeah,
athletic training comes from. Thank you for clarifying that today. So
yeah. No,
truly, we
it,
are
it's a
all
little bit.
going.
Yeah, it's the part that fits with Lent a great deal. I mean, there's really three things that are very popular in society. You might say even now, um, they're used heavily as images about our spiritual life. One is the race that I was talking about, and very clearly for the Greeks with the Olympics and stuff. Uh, I mean, it's kind of like us using Star Trek or something, just to give an example, because we pretty much know, most people throughout Canada would understand that, or who know who the Governor General is. You can talk about these kinds of things. And for Paul, he's not pushing paganism, but he's using an example everybody knows. Uh, so one is the race. Another one that's used in the New Testament is the battle. Dressing. It's in one of the shorter pastoral letters. Um, we Christians put on the shield, which is the word of God. Put on the helmet of faith, and so we're dressing up as a Roman legionnaire to fight our battles with evil, and but our sword is the word of God. It's not a real sword. Our shield is I don't want to get into it because I might confuse them, but every part of the armor is a different thing that Christians should be doing, right? So the battle, and we were told we have run the race, or we have fought the battle, the good fight. You want to be able to go to the next judgment and say you fought the good fight. And then the third one, which people sometimes forget, but which ironically is something I learned in high school, because we had the high school I went to, Shevchenko School, was um, 75% Ukrainian background, 20% Mennonites from Ukraine, and 5% everything else from the world, everybody else. So we had a high school choir, and we used to sing this fantastic Mennonite hymn. I can't remember the whole hymn, but the Mennonite hymn was about the Lord of the Dance, which is really funny because Mennonites usually don't dance. But the Lord of the Dance was this um, the pious religious dance of the believers. The joy. So we have these three images that are from our regular life: the race, the battle, and then don't forget we are supposed to be rejoicing all the time. This is, it's like St. Paul says, rejoice always. And so part of our life is, are we doing the dance correctly? We are living our lives the way we're supposed to, and we are enjoying it. We are not going through like Father Hopko's book about Lent, or no, or is
Lenten
it,
journey.
or the other one, or maybe it's Father Schmeman's book. One of the it's called, yeah, Father Schmeman's book talks about Great Lent, the um, the bright sadness, like the joyous sadness. Um, so we have to be, even
Joyful,
when we're
joyful
fasting.
morning. I think.
Yeah,
I
that's
think he
yeah,
talks about joyful morning. Yes.
joyful morning. But the joy is supposed to be part even of the fasting. Like I started out with quoting the question of Jesus' words about fasting. Be joyous. Don't let people know. Don't be dismal. Don't don't put ashes on your head like the Old Testament. Wash your face. look normal. Don't try to make yourself look like some kind of martyr, as we would say in today's word. Not Orthodox martyr, but don't be a drama queen. Don't be a drama queen because you're fasting. That's what Jesus was trying to tell us. And so, in this way, it's the same sort of thing. Joy is supposed to be there. So we prepare correctly, following the rules, so we can win the race. We put on all our armor so that we can defeat evil in our hearts and in our communities. And we don't forget the joy that has to be in our hearts. We have to feel like dancing because we're Christians. This is,
Absolutely.
and some of the liturgical movements are called the dance sometimes.
I am
So
uh, I am
anyway,
actually, or just you're talking about joyfulness, in the
yeah.
church, in one of the books that I read, it's called it's Memoirs of Journals of Father Alexander Schmemann.
Oh
You
yes,
know, so he wrote exactly what you were talking about. The fact that why do we come to church, make a somber faces, why do we come to church, just like, to that punishing institution? Since
hmm
when did we lose the joy of
yes,
faith? And
and
that was his question.
yeah, and it's the joy has to be there even in Lent, and um, because we're reminded by somebody, I don't know, one of those books, um, that even when we're on Holy Friday or Holy Thursday in the really sad times, we are making the sign of the cross, which for Christians is a sign of victory, not the sign of death. And so, even when we are praying the prayers of the sadness of the funeral of Jesus, we are making the sign of the cross, which is a sign of the victory of Christ over death and already the celebration of Easter. So these things have to stay in our minds at the same time.
Absolutely.
And so anyway, but um, the well, there's many ways of looking at it, but I think these three metaphors. I mean, they're not particularly about fasting, but they are about our life, and um, Lent is to center our life on Christ, and so this all has. There's lots of ways of talking about Lent. Um, I once had to give two talks. If you're going to invite me next week, don't invite me next week. But I had to give once two talks on Lent to the same people, 2 or 3 weeks apart. So I didn't want. I could, the second one I talked about leaving the baggage behind. Right. This is the whole thing of Forgiveness Sunday. You got grudges against people, leave it behind. Nobody goes on a joyous journey carrying 5 or 6 great big suitcases. Maybe once in your life when you moved from Ukraine to Canada, you got 6 or 8 suitcases and you got all your friends helping you carry them. But nobody
I
goes on a
had
regular
one.
journey like that, right?
I only had one.
You only had one, yeah. So that's the thing. But so there's the whole thing that way too. What is really important, and fancy clothes, jeweled crosses, um, fancy hats. These are not necessary for the journey. Pride is not necessary. Humility is necessary because you're going to feel humble if you do the fasting seriously, no matter what level you're doing it at, because it's going to interfere with your normal life and what you think is good,
Absolutely.
and that sort of thing. So leave stuff at home and take stuff with you that you need. And
So I also just kind of like to finish it up about this athletic training of us
yes,
getting ready for this.
hmm
Father Schmemann and many other Orthodox theologians more and more now, and Father, by the way, congratulations on finishing your PhD.
thank you.
Talk about the danger of reduction of our Orthodox theology to fathers and spirituality.
Yes,
We reduce, as Father Cyril Havarun said, we reduce our tradition to traditionalism,
yes,
which is
exactly.
like, taking this the way it was there, just kind of looking at it and put it back, not realizing, not going through us, not how do you say, transferring through us and passing the new acquired knowledge based on the faith of fathers to the next generation. The next generation takes the same thing and again going through them and
Yeah,
so on. So we talk about reduction of our faith, and the reason why we have those conversations here today, and I'm really grateful, Orcha, for you to be here today. And now that you kind of gave me a moral permission to ask you another time to come and talk, I got the hint, and of course I'll
We're,
invite you.
we're, God willing, we'll still be alive. There's more than one, great Lent. It could be next year too.
That's
I
right.
don't
That's
want
right.
you to push other people away.
But right, but
Definitely.
right now is that a difficult time. When we are in quarantine and now the third wave of COVID-19 starts. I think people need to hear the satisfying messages about our faith, not only from one priest that talks on a Sunday during the sermon and reuses the sermon from year to year to year.
No, we don't do that, do we? I don't know.
No,
Just Ottawa, maybe. I don't know.
who knows? In Ottawa, there's you translate it into
Yeah,
Ukrainian.
and
It's already 2 years in a row. You can
I've,
have something different.
I've told people that I'm very fortunate because very often you can't use the sermon very often in the parish because you're there for 20 years and but I'm teaching students, so they're not around more than 4 or 5 years. So I don't change parishes, but my entire parish changes every 5 years.
But the whole point of it is just to bring to people understanding about how rich our faith is,
Hmm.
and in the context of Ukrainian Orthodoxy, like how how blessed we are to have this church of ours that we have now.
Hmm.
And we are so, and said it many times, I probably repeat it many times again. As I'm reading, studying the history of our church, I am in awe how people with very little educational background, there's no theological training, but there's faith in their hearts, how even after 20 years being in Canada, they still fought, or 30 almost years being in Canada, they fought and established an Orthodox church.
Yeah.
And was all the odds against that church. Because everybody were poaching, poaching, sorry,
Coaching.
for us. Yeah, yeah. So, Presbyterian Church wanted us, Roman Catholic Church wanted us, and
Yeah.
this mission and stuff like that. Everybody were pulling towards us. And then, by the providence of God, we got the church in 1918, and I think this is a treasure we need to carry forever. I wanted to say that also Lucy Shavchuk is here from Dauphin, Manitoba,
Oh,
which
okay.
is a blessing. Dauphin is a center of universe.
That's right. It is the center of universe where priests all go on summer vacation to
That's
visit
right.
the in-laws. Yeah.
Yes. So for instance, like we had all over the Dobrodik, we almost should have a association of Dobrodiki who come from Dauphin. So
That's right.
Father Roman's wife comes from Dauphin, my wife comes from
That's
Manitoba,
right.
near Dauphin, and
We
many
have to
other
start
priests.
having we have to start having biannual Soborchik or something.
That's right, in
Having
Dauphin,
meetings. Yeah.
pilgrimage,
Yeah.
pilgrimage. So. But jokes aside, it's like I said, it's a very we're very blessed to have our church, and I just wanted to cannot emphasize it. And I'm trying to get some of the people like Taras Samets from our parish, who was a grandson of Father Petros Samets,
Oh yes.
who
Yes.
who was one of the first three priests ordained in our church.
Absolutely. Yes. Yes.
And he talked wonderfully about this experience that his grandfather had told him and stuff like that. So, like I said, we are very fortunate. We are very blessed, and we are praying to God that He continues with our church to help our church to be built in Canada,
Hmm.
overcome the difficulties, and move on, kind of thing. So, добре,
Super.
отче. Я зараз скажу. Sorry, anything that you would like to say in conclusion, because
No,
it's
that's good. No, I. Well, maybe it's just one little thing. I mean, sometimes people think laughter is some kind of sin, and they try to be sad all the time, especially during Lent. I once heard a Lenten talk by a young person who wasn't a priest yet, that talked about the fact that the saints never laughed, and especially Saint John the Evangelist never laughed. He only laughed once in his life. I'm thinking, first of all, how do you know that? That is impossible. That's you're making it up. But also, there are some, right. We are not the extremes. Like nothing is important. We laugh at everything, and we're not the extremes where uh, we have to be so sad because we're sinners, and we have to be repentant. Repenting also leads to joy when we know we've repented and Lord has saved us. So joy and laughter is part of the
absolutely, absolutely.
Christian life and the spiritual growth.
If we if we
Laughing at other people and laughing at cripples, as they say in the Bible, right? We don't say cripples anymore, but laughing at physically challenged people is
Great sin.
a possibility. You can be suspended from the priesthood or the episcopate for that. It's a serious thing. You don't laugh at other people, but if the moment I I like to laugh at the fact that God is making my life more simple by taking away my hair. I don't even have to have a comb most of the time. So if you laugh at yourself, it's okay.
Yeah, but also, you know, like, I mean, church leads us to joy, you know,
Yes, joy.
and
Yes.
joy and happiness could be expressed as smiling, as laughing, is gratitude. Actually, how can you not be joyful and blessed and happy, you know, and when you realize all the beauties that God had sent to our lives, you know, and not to smile, you know,
Mm-hmm.
you have to, the happiness comes from within, from our faith. Я думаю, отче, ми зараз. So, by the way, this is the month. March is the month of calling it to St. Andrew's College, and Father Roman Bozyk is the dean of St. Andrew's College. So, if you know of anybody that would like to join theological studies online or offline, you know, please contact Father Roman directly. And if you need his email address and cannot contact him, email me, and I'll be more than happy to email Father Roman's address. You know,
Sure.
once again, there's a in a Star Wars, there's that notion of guardians of the galaxy, you know. So
Ah,
Father Roman and Добродій Genya are guardians of our galaxy, of our college too. So ще дуже дякую вам for fantastic.
it's an honor to be here. It's the best place.
So thank you very much for doing this job. And like I said, you know, not only that we invite people who want to become priests to take the
Yeah.
colleges courses, but we also invite people who would like to take interest courses. Now
Oh, absolutely.
that there is
Absolutely.
online courses, and then for girls, for men and women, you know, it's not limited. You know, like it has to be understood. It's not limited. And now that was internet, the possibilities are unlimited. And I wanted to say once again to encourage, and I'll keep encourage people to come to St. Andrew's College, to join, to register for course, or to just for general knowledge. We are,
Mhm.
you know, like society presents to us so many challenges. So it's good to have behind your belt at least some tool set to be able to answer your questions and your struggles. Я тільки хотів сказати ще раз, отче, вам дякую за все. І ми закінчимо, отче, молитвою, і я вас попрошу тоді до благословення. Добре?
Добре.
Ім'я Отця і Сина Святого Духа, амінь. Ім'я Отця і Сина Святого Духа, амінь. Ім'я Отця і Сина Святого Духа, амінь. Богородице Діво, радуйся, благодатна Марія, Господь з тобою, благословена ти в жонах, і благословений плід утроби твоєї, бо ти породила Христа, Спаса душ наших. Слава Отцю і Сину Святому Духу, нині повсякчас, на віки віків. Амінь. Господи помилуй, Господи помилуй, Господи помилуй, всечесний Отче, благослови.
Благодать Господа наш Ісуса Христа нехай укріпить нас і благословить нас на цей день і на все життя. Амінь.
Отця і Сина Святого Духа, амінь. Ім'я Отця і Сина Святого Духа, амінь. Ім'я Отця і Сина Святого Духа, амінь. Дякую всім,
Дякую.
дякую вам, Отче.